marketing communications has short and long-term growth opportunity. Short term, we've got clinical programs that have capacity and we can pump the gas on that one. But this creates long-term growth opportunities because if we're retaining more people and bringing more people in, that's going to create greater access for consumers to choose us because we're keeping people. And so I pitch it to my team as, yeah, our partnership with people is incredibly important from a long-term growth perspective.
Welcome to The Move-In, a senior living marketing podcast from Unlock Health, a full-service marketing partner for the aging services industry. Join us for candid conversations exploring the latest marketing strategies with the senior living community leaders and innovative solution partners who are moving our industry forward. Together, we'll build a community to build better communities.
What could happen if your HR and marketing teams work together, not just on hiring campaigns, but to completely redefine your company culture? Hello, I'm Larry Williams, and welcome to the Move-In Senior Living Marketing powered by Unlock Health. When HR and marketing share the same playbook, the story you tell outside actually matches the experience inside, and that's where real momentum starts. Now, today's episode is a little different. This is a conversation that I recorded last year on another podcast, but it's one I believe the senior living community, as we kick off production on the episodes that we recorded at Smash last week, I wanted to bring this story back because it's timeless. It's about leadership, collaboration, and culture, three things that never go out of style. In this conversation, you'll hear from Katie Beach, the Vice President of People Operations with Nebraska Medicine, and Frank Lococo, former Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Nebraska Medicine, and now Chief Marketing and Communication Officer with CentraCare. Together, they share how their teams built Together Extraordinary, not as a campaign, but as a movement that transformed their organization from the inside out. Here are a few things you'll take away from this episode. Building an internal brand. How Nebraska Medicine created Together Extraordinary, a movement that strengthened culture, engagement, and retention. Plus the HR and marketing partnership. The power of collaboration between people operations and marketing to align culture, recruiting, and storytelling. And also measuring and sustaining success. How they tracked real results, more applications, less turnover, and kept the culture alive through intentional action. It's a masterclass in how internal branding can fuel growth, retention, and pride across an organization. All right, let's jump into it.
All right, we are back on the move. We got Katie Beach, who is the Vice President of People Operations at Nebraska Medicine, and Frank Lococo, who is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Nebraska Medicine. And we're going to have a great conversation today. So we always talk about marketing associated with growth strategies, but the aspect of marketing we don't discuss enough is really the internal marketing and really the culture aspect. So I appreciate both Frank and Katie joining us today as we want to get both perspectives really on the HR side as well as the marketing and communication. So welcome. Thanks for being a part of this. And just if you don't mind, just kind of give us a background about yourself. So Katie, we'll start with you.
Okay, Katie Beach, I'm so glad to be here with you today. And as you said, I'm Vice President of People Operations. I've been with Nebraska Medicine for 9 years. This is my first stint in healthcare. Prior to that, I spent time on the recruiting side, leading recruiting teams in industries like trucking and heavy machinery, manufacturing. And so I was very excited to jump into healthcare for the mission. So much curiosity around operations and people. So really happy to be at Nebraska Medicine in healthcare and here with you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's Frank, let us know what you're up to and how you got to this point.
Sure. So I've been with Nebraska Medicine a little under where Katie was. I've been here about 8 years. I actually started in the airline industry where I spent 9 years, right there. And kind of grew up in the consumer side of things, right? I did not grow up in the healthcare space like Katie didn't either. And then I moved into sports and then ended up in healthcare marketing. And, that's been the majority of my career. I was with another academic health system in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then came to Omaha, Nebraska for this role, like I mentioned, 8 years ago. And great to be here with you, Larry, and always with Katie.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny where life takes you. There's so many times these conversations start with, I did not know I was going to wind up in healthcare. And it's funny how your life will take you to that direction, but once you're in it, you find a different level of passion for what you do. So I'm thankful that you both, found your way to Nebraska medicine, and really fortunate that you really came together and used, your strengths to create something so powerful. And so I'd like to kind of go back a few steps and say, like, when did you realize that, you can leverage each other's strengths to build Nebraska medicine to that next level? I didn't know if there was that foundational element with, if there was a time frame where you realized that, okay, we need to work together on this. And how did that conversation start?
I'm happy to start, and Frank, certainly please jump in. I think there was a realization of a need to look at, assess, sort of take a step back post pandemic. And, I think what we realized was not only had so much changed in our workforce internally and externally to Nebraska medicine, what was important to employees had changed. And it was important for us to take a step back and just do that assessment. And, what is our employment brand today? What do we aspire for it to be? What assumptions are we making decisions off of? Hiring people, what assumptions are we making about why people come to Nebraska medicine and stay here? And ultimately, in those points of reflection, we realized so much of what we were focused on was based off of assumption, based off of an employment brand that was put in place pre-COVID. And given that so many things had changed, it was time to take a look. And thankfully, we also had a board member who asked the right question at the right time to say, what is the employment brand? What do we know for sure? And that was really the launch of Frank and I's partnership and work around what it means to be an employee of Nebraska medicine, what's most important, and what do we aspire to be.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Frank, I saw you seemed like you wanted to add something there.
This has been a great partnership, and it's something that we've built over the years. And, one of our bosses says, build confidence, earn trust. And we're at that point where we have explicit trust with each other, and assume positive intent because, by working together, we can accomplish something that's deeper and wider, would never be possible if one or the other of us just singularly approach this. And so, this partnership, given, our curation of the brand, the consumer brand, and kind of leveraging that to help drive and create synergy between the employment brand was just a logical partnership. And I've found, especially in my time here, we can accomplish so much more when there's partnerships like between marketing communications and our people team.
And I think there's a mutual respect for each other's strengths and expertise, which made this such a dynamic partnership.
Yeah, that's really important. I think so often it's about taking the ego out of it and saying, it's okay, I'm not the best at this. I need help, and really leveraging one another's strengths as you go through that process. Going back to kind of where this really formulated, you mentioned like going through that post-COVID world. And I'd like to get your feedback to why that was impactful. Why did that springboard into where you are now?
Just so many things had shifted. Our workforce had turned over. We were experiencing shifts in our external labor market that had changed the way we need to think about why people come here and why they stay. Our turnover was incredible. And there was just this critical point of having to take that step back and say, something's not working. Things are different, but we have to take the time to understand why. Healthcare had, just so every industry was impacted differently by COVID. And I think we experienced it in our own unique way of people leaving healthcare altogether, burnout. Some individuals, it was the opposite, where they never had felt more drawn to healthcare based on the challenges and the impact COVID had. And it was our job to figure out, with that spectrum of where people were post-COVID, how do we come to understand what's most important to them because it had shifted?
Yeah. And I feel like so often we focus on, talent acquisition, but so much of this is just retaining talent first and foremost. Is that something did you have a focus on really building that culture to retain that talent first before focusing on the talent acquisition side of it?
It was both. It was definitely both. Our reality was we were, as our COO and president that we often quote puts it simply, and we got to hire more and lose less. And that was not the situation we were in when we launched this work. We had more people leaving than we had coming in. And as I said, the pool of individuals to come into the organization was dwindling. And so to your point, that was when we had to take that step back and say, okay, we have great talent within the walls of Nebraska Medicine today, doing so many different types of roles, contributing in so many different ways. But we had to figure out a way to engage them and remind them of why Nebraska Medicine is such an incredible place to work. And as I said, what we realized was we're asked the question, why do people come and why do they go? We were basing our assumptions off of a pre-COVID world.
Yeah, it's that theory of what got you here won't get you there. And I love hearing your reflection of the leadership aspect. And so I kind of want to, ask you, Frank, what role does leadership play in encouraging, shaping, and maintaining this internal brand culture where it supports that, the organizational goals? Because there has to be a buy-in at that level before this can really take shape.
I think there really has to be a buy-in at all levels if this is really going to be successful. And Katie and I did a lot of work, both with our frontline colleagues to get their insights and input and, what are we doing well? Where are there opportunities for improvement? And then, with leadership to commit to supporting what our colleagues were saying and, being able to effectively present a way to tell the story inside and outside of our walls that people would buy into, that was authentic and legitimate. And man, lightning struck and it really resonated. I would say actually more so at the colleague level first. It took a little bit of time with leadership, but it was all supported by data and insights. And I've often said, and Katie's heard me a number of times, throughout my 25 plus years in marketing, this is easily the most researched endeavor I've ever been a part of. And, we have the results to show that it's been successful. And so, going back to that comment to build confidence, earn trust, I think we did that very, very quickly with executive leadership as we worked towards launch and then since launch.
That's really great. I appreciate you. I mentioned the leadership side, but you stated it was, in all parties that had to have buy-in. And you also mentioned data. If you don't mind me asking, what data points were you watching or really focused on as you went through this process?
Katie?
Yeah, well, you fill in where I miss.
This is that team dynamic, by the way.
Right.
I'm seeing it firsthand.
Right. Yeah. Frank will tell me what I missed here. So we knew that from the onset, in order for us to get buy-in, it was going to be critical that we could demonstrate ROI. And so even before we went live, Frank and I spent an incredible amount of time saying, what are we going to measure? So that along the way, at different parts of, not only launch, but the sustainment of Together Extraordinary, that we could demonstrate its value and demonstrate its impact. Once we got through the first quarter, the first 3 months of Together Extraordinary launching and being introduced internally and externally, we measured both recruitment and retention outcomes. Everything from visits to the Together Extraordinary site, increase in application flow, increase in the number of folks we hire. And then from a turnover standpoint, we measured impact on first year and gross turnover. Gosh, there's one more, Frank, and there's 6 of them. I can't remember the one I missed.
Improvement in total turnover, voluntary turnover, and first year turnover.
Yes. So those are the key measurements we focus on today. Certainly more that will come as we continue to measure the impact.
And as part of that, the partnership was really important, right? The impressive data that we're seeing in the quarter that Katie alluded to, we had a 41% increase in visitors to our careers landing page since the launch. That's amazing, right?
That's incredible.
We had 36% increase in external applications, which is huge. But then most importantly, we had a 22% increase in external candidates that we hired. And if we would have just approached this from a marketing communications perspective, we could have probably gotten close on that careers site. We could have probably generated a lot of external applications. But if like talent acquisition wasn't at the table from the get-go as part of Katie's team, they wouldn't have been prepared for this influx. And so I had a peer who presented that they had similar data, but then when they got to the increase in external candidates hired, it was 2%. And it was because talent acquisition was not prepared for the influx. They were not, geared up to be able to handle that. And because of this partnership, there was clarity, alignment, and focus where Katie was on point with her team. They were ready to go. And you could see that carry through all of those data elements to really ensure maximum success.
And I think the downstream impact of that was our team saw how important it was for Frank and I to be working well together and have goal alignment and have measurable outcomes. And then it just intentionally, it was infiltrated into their work and how they partnered together. So all along the way, I don't ever remember a time where we had to say, remember, you have to work together and remember that it's important. That was just never a part of the equation, because I think, one, they saw how Frank and I worked together, but immediately they just saw this is only successful if we share the vision, we share the responsibility, and we share that, the impact this is having.
Yeah, and I feel like that spreads through the culture as well. And when departments work so well together, that really encourages other partnerships within the organization. And I like the clarity, alignment, and focus, Frank. I'm glad you said that. How, as you've developed this partnership, how often would your teams meet? Or would it just be Frank and Katie and then bringing others along? How did y'all develop this type of partnership and this open line of communication?
Imagine dropping a pebble in a still pond and you get that ripple effect in those circles that just expand. I mean, yeah, Katie and I were kind of spearheading this, but we certainly had our leadership teams, our respected department staff members, and then we were bringing in others. We had a working group that involved other areas of the organization. We re-engaged focus groups to validate things that we were working on. So we weren't just taking that initial data and insights and just executing, but we were re-engaging staff to be like, hey, based on what you said, here are a couple of options we've come up with. What do you guys think? Are we on track? Oh, change this, change that. They like this option better. And that ended up helping not only from a success perspective, from my point of view in terms of the execution, but I think it also helped as we were going to executive leadership, what you alluded to earlier, because they're like, well, what if we did this? And, why isn't it extraordinary together? And we had very specific data points we could go back to that said staff were really focused on nailing the together piece, whether it's colleague to colleague, colleague to leader, doctor and nurse. If we don't nail the together piece, we can't be extraordinary. So there was intentionality on together extraordinary. And we were able to address that with some of our executive leaders who really felt, no, it should be extraordinary together based on that feedback.
Yeah, and I'm sure those were some probably challenging conversations at times across the board, and a lot of people had to check their egos, and that can be challenging as well. And springboarding this into what you mentioned earlier about really attracting top talent, how did that strong internal brand really help pave the way for to attract that top talent?
Well, critical to this was, and this was certainly an important conversation we had with our execs, was we can't overpromise and underdeliver. And so the critical part of making sure, everything that Frank just talked about of feedback from our colleagues and making sure this represents the voice of our colleagues and it resonates, but there's still an aspirational component of this. That was critical because as we think about recruiters, recruiting talent and having a conversation about what it means to be together extraordinary and how they'll experience it as they walk through the doors of Nebraska Medicine, no matter what role they're in, that internal culture and delivering on that message and delivering on what we've said they will experience was critical. And that's what we had to be sure was going to be the experience that they had when they walked through the doors. And certainly One of the most pivotal conversations we had with our execs where we had to bring additional data in was to say, look, yes, we say Together Extraordinary is aspirational, but here's the data that shows the path that we're on and the positive trajectory that we're on from a leadership component, from a turnover component, from a hiring. And so it really demonstrated how close we are and how we're already living the Together Extraordinary.
And I want to just underline something that Katie said, and I'm not going to be able to do it verbatim, but form has to follow function, right? We can come up with a beautiful, slick campaign, and some of our executive leadership kind of alluded to, well, this just sounds like advertising. And it's like, no, this is a movement. Like, there are operational changes that we're making as an organization that's being driven by the people team. We're the ones who are like packaging this up and being able to tell the story internally and externally. And that's where the credibility needs to happen. If it's just going to be a campaign, I think this would have failed miserably and really harmed us internally. And we would have had probably an erosion of trust in leadership. But because form was following function, like, changes were being made fundamentally based on colleague feedback, it really was the most holistic approach.
And I'm sure that provided a lot of confidence as you told that story, Frank. And like you said, there's substance there. This is not just putting a message out there. Like you said, it's not another ad. It's actually, speaking the truth. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, Frank, of as you told the story, how did you go about doing so? Like, what channels did you use and what were those activations?
You'll need part 2 to this.
Okay.
To get through all the activations. But, it was really a holistic approach, multi-channel approach, internal and external. There were all the traditional elements, the digital pieces, the website, radio, TV, and all that. But, we extended it into graphics, like, internal building graphics. We extended it into the retail space where, we had a whole line in our company store of Together Extraordinary merchandise that our colleagues could purchase. And we did have some swag items because, we did, a launch video and a rally video, and we did events and we did a lot of stuff to prep leaders and then roll out to colleagues and whatnot. But we're rebranding everything that we're doing under Together Extraordinary. So we have holiday breakfasts coming up. Well, that's going to be under the Together Extraordinary umbrella. But going back to retail, we have sold out multiple times of the collection. And it's a collection of more than a dozen SKUs of t-shirts and baseball caps and sweatshirts and umbrellas, like just all sorts of things that it took me 3 orders to get my t-shirt, and the department reports to me. Like, it was in such high demand. And we just launched a few weeks ago, we had the t-shirt was black and now we have a purple one. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to order that. I'm like, oh, it's sold out.
That has to feel good.
It does feel good. But, and Katie's told the story, but, we're out in the community and we know it's a colleague because, oh my gosh, they have a Together Extraordinary t-shirt or sweatshirt or baseball cap or whatever. And it's like, they're wearing the employment brand as a badge of pride. And that's just remarkable to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's especially it has to bring so much pride when you see that too. It's because it's one thing to have the items available, but for people want to actively wear, it says a lot. And I'm kind of curious on your side of things, Katie, which is, how did you pull this together for the onboarding process? Because you have the internal side of it, but how did you really, get this communication, tell the story through the onboarding to ensure like new hires are aligned with company values?
Yeah, I think there's really 2 avenues we followed there. One, Frank already mentioned, we started working on that as soon as we understood that there was opportunity from an onboarding and orientation perspective. So as soon as we got that feedback, that research from our colleagues, 9 months before we launched Together Extraordinary, we started making improvements. We started making changes. And then as we rolled out Together Extraordinary, and I would say this is more from an internal perspective, we connected it back to that feedback. We connected those changes back to Together Extraordinary, so that all along the way, to underscore the point Frank made, they already were experiencing it. They were already living it. And then when new hires, today, from the very first interaction new hires applicants have with us, they're at our career website, which is Together Extraordinary. The recruiters are talking about Together Extraordinary. And then, Frank mentioned already some of the ways we've introduced Together Extraordinary we have a new colleague welcome event where they see a video that introduces not just Together Extraordinary, but they experience it through their interactions, and they see how our colleagues in this video embrace each other, embrace this brand, and they experience it at the department level. So we're very intentional about making improvements along the way pre-launch, and then ensuring as part of our cross-functional team that before Together Extraordinary was visible and alive external to Nebraska Medicine, that the people team and the marketing team had literally captured every aspect of that interaction to ensure that from the very first moment that they experienced our brand, they were learning about Together Extraordinary.
And Katie said something she said a lot of important things there, but one thing that I think is extraordinarily important is the intentionality. Mm-hmm. Like, this wasn't a set it and forget it. Hey, we crossed a finish line, let's move on to something else. This is an ongoing, intentional effort to continue to nurture and curate the experience, the employment brand of Together Extraordinary inside and outside of our walls. It is, in essence, a plant that we have to fertilize and water and tend to, because we don't want to go back to a time, when Katie said we launched the last employment brand, I think it was like 2015 or 16, and we kind of set it and forget it. And we didn't evolve it. We didn't adapt it. And it got stale, especially with everything going on. We don't want to go back to that. There's so much opportunity. There's been so much success. It needs that intentionality.
Yeah, I think the intentionality is the key in this conversation on all fronts. And I'm sure, Frank, you can especially speak to this. Marketing is always changing. And so it's more important than ever to always be working on that. It's this infinite game that you can't just sit back and relax and rest, that, all is going well, but you have to be intentional about always working on this. And we spoke with Michael Castanon with Alter Behavioral Health a few weeks ago, and he discusses the importance of a strong culture, a great culture in healthcare and health and wellness, because it impacts the service we provide. And so I was going to see if you had any feedback to how this has improved business overall and growth objectives at Nebraska Medicine.
So I'll take a swing because mine will be short on this one. Okay. From a marketing communications perspective, like you kind of kicked this off, we're so focused on clinical program marketing and kind of going after these immediate ways to generate leads and whatnot. And the way I pitched it to my team is, marketing communications has short and long-term growth opportunities. Mm-hmm. Short term, we've got clinical programs that have capacity and we can pump the gas on that one. But this creates long-term growth opportunities, because if we're retaining more people and bringing more people in, that is going to expand our capacity, right? That's going to create greater access for consumers to choose us because we're staffed up and we're keeping people. And so to me, I pitch it to my team as, our partnership with people is incredibly important from a long-term growth perspective. We're still focused on those short-term clinical program marketing opportunities, but this is definitely a growth play.
Yeah, thank you for that. Katie, you have anything else to add, or did Frank just take it and run with it and you just give us a thumbs up with it?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, because you mentioned hire more, lose less, we needed to bring more people in, but I think the reality is it's really hard to establish a culture with high turnover. Mm-hmm. If you have this constant churn of people leaving and coming in. And Together Extraordinary, in conjunction with the improved turnover, retention outcomes we're having, that's where the magic of the culture is. With the right leaders in the right role, we're hiring more and losing less. And all of that contributes to these leaders' ability to just like really stabilize their team culture and focus on, they have people staying longer, they're developing these relationships, and they're kind of back in this position to feel like they have more control over the culture they want to establish, together extraordinary. And so, I mean, that's where the growth and the magic happens.
Yeah,
And I want to just elevate something that Katie and her team, though, are doing that she hasn't mentioned yet, but I think it helps in our environment and with our leaders to help support them from a corporate perspective. Katie and her team did a great job launching career pathing. And a lot of times people are leaving here to go pursue, they're going from a medical assistant, they want to become a nurse or whatever. And we didn't really make it easy. And Katie's team did an exceptional job at listening to the feedback and then launching career pathing as a way to support our leaders and our workforce and keep more people, because people now see a path that I can grow my career with Nebraska Medicine. And they did a phenomenal job with that.
That's great. Thank you for adding that, and kudos to you and your team, Katie, for developing that. I feel like that's an area that, all organizations can improve on. And that kind of brings me to another question, which is, what's the thing that I have not asked you about that you think it'd be good to add to this conversation? And if it's a no, it's all good.
Yeah, I don't know that you've missed anything per se. I've spent a little bit of time being reflective, but then also kind of like forecasting for myself. So being reflective, I don't know that I would have changed much, because I really do think we kind of hit a home run on this one. So in reflecting back, I mean, could we have done a little bit more? Yes. But I don't think it would have had a better impact than the results we've achieved. But going forward, I've started this conversation with my leadership team, and Katie and I have had this conversation, but it's like, what's next? What else can we do? Where do we take it from here? Because to what we said earlier, you can't just set it and forget it. And so we get about 2 years out of our assets. We're going to be coming up on a year here in the not too distant future. We need to start planning. Where do we go from here? And, we put a call out for colleagues. Hey, who wants to be a part of this campaign launch and this movement launch, to be the face of it and whatnot? And we only put it out there for like 1 week, like not even 7 days, like a work week. Yeah. And we had more than 200 colleagues be like, hey, I'd love to be a part of this, including physicians. And so, we've been able to tell stories and utilize and plug people in different opportunities. But how do we continue to foster that goodwill and that celebration of our colleagues? So not necessarily a question you missed, but just thinking about going forward, like, we're not done yet. Like, the intentionality is very serious.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. And Katie, next, like, kind of the same question, but I'm kind of going to alter it a little bit. So what is that move in developing an internal brand? And what's your advice to others who are looking to take a similar approach?
Well, you have to have a strong partnership with marketing.
Yeah.
I think is step one. Ego aside, share the vision, share the work, celebrate the successes. And something we've said, and this is not necessarily a description Frank and I have used for this work, but we've used it several times in this discussion. Anything that happened with the rollout and the lead up to the launch of Together Extraordinary, that was happenstance. We were intentional. We were intentional about the work. We were intentional about the role that we asked leaders to play and the role that we asked colleagues to play. It was just, we were very intentional. And I would say the advice I would give to anyone beginning this journey is be vulnerable, lean into the research, accept the feedback for what it is, the good, the bad. You have to lean into that and be willing to celebrate the good, but really, really lean into the opportunity. And the opportunity that we leaned into 9 to 12 months leading up to the launch of Together Extraordinary is, in my opinion, really what set us up for the most success, because they had already experienced it. They had seen us take action on their feedback, and they were experiencing a different culture and a different movement as we were launching Together Extraordinary external to the world.
Well, thank you both for sharing this story, sharing the journey, and also just for making such an impact in people's lives. And just because of your efforts, more people, received care. They found a place they love to work. So again, great job to both of you. And where can people find you if they're looking to learn more about Nebraska medicine, about you both, whatever that looks like?
I mean, you can certainly go to nebraskamed.com. You can navigate to our careers website. We've done a lot of work on that. It's, again, one of those things that's going to continue to evolve. And you can certainly find me on LinkedIn if you want to make a connection.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Anything you want to add, Katie?
Nope, ditto. You can find me on all those same places.
I like this teamwork. This is great. A lot of dittos and going back and forth. So thank you both for joining us today, and look forward to seeing more of your work.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
What a powerful conversation with Frank and Katie. Even though we recorded this episode last year, the lessons still hit hard today, especially as we think about where senior living marketing and leadership are headed next. And this is a perfect bridge episode before we roll out our new Smash series, which will start next week. Those conversations we recorded last week that dig deeper into the future of growth, culture, and connection in senior living. But before we wrap, here are 3 actionable takeaways from today's conversation. First, be intentional about your internal brand. Listen to your team, evolve your message, and make sure your internal culture reflects what you promise externally. Second, align HR and marketing from the start. With both teams share data, goals, and vision, you create a culture that attracts and keeps great people. And third, measure, adapt, and keep it alive. Track the outcomes from turnover to engagement and stay intentional so your culture continues to grow. These lessons from healthcare leadership translate directly into senior living, where people and culture drive everything we do. Thanks again to Frank and Katie for sharing their insights, and thank you for listening. And until next time, let's go create some meaningful connections.